panel discussion on making commitments to cleaner, more resilient, and regenerative communities. For our virtual attendees, please go back to the main agenda and select this session to join in. Cities around the world are making commitments to cleaner, more resilient, and regenerative communities. This means taking a hard look at waste, which inevitably means making the invisible visible. Joining us now to discuss this critical topic today are Signe Kongebro, Global Design Director of Urbanism and Partner at Henning Larsen; Keefe Harrison, CEO of Recycling Partnership; Colleen Litkenhaus Tague, Global Director of Plastics and Circularity, Government Affairs at Dow; and Stephen Pedigo, Professor of Practice, Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. They will be discussing how we shift from talking about sustainable cities and a net zero and zero waste future to taking real action. Please give a warm welcome to Signe, Keefe, Colleen, and Stephen.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you guys. For those that are here in New York, as well as those that are joining us online. I'm Steve Pedigo. I'm faculty at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Super excited to talk about this concept of the idea of invisible cities. I was telling our great panelists, for those of you that know me, I know nothing about this topic, so I'm just going to be the Oprah for the next 45 minutes of being able to ask, I think, hopefully some really good questions. The way we'll operate our panel is, what I thought we would do is just start with a brief round of introductions, and I've asked each of our panelists just to share a couple key elements of their bios with you and things that may be relevant to our conversation, and then we'll dive into some conversations about the topics at hand. So with that, let's, Signe, welcome. Signe's here from Copenhagen. Let's welcome her to New York. Signe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm a trained architect, and I'm working as a global design director now in our company. We are approximately 750 globally. And my focus is how to find and pioneer new knowledge to drive a green transition in our cities, to work for life-centered cities, actually.
Awesome. Signe was here for Climate Week.
Yes.
You spent some time recently in Northwest Arkansas, and you're back, so you have seen real America, so to speak. So welcome. It's good to see you, and thanks for joining us. Our second panelist is Keefe. Keefe, welcome out from Providence.
Yep, Providence, Rhode Island. Hi, I'm Keefe Harrison. I'm founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership. We're a nonprofit that was formed just short of 10 years ago because there was no entity bringing together the public sector, the private sector around solutions. So in my background, I've done work tagging sea turtles in Costa Rica, studying reindeer husbandry in Finland, working on a sustainable logging crew in North Carolina. And what I love most is taking things that feel abstract and putting them together and driving towards action.
Okay. And so we were talking before we're coming out, you're going to make sure we're getting to specific action steps for folks to operate on today. That's our goal as a panelist. And then our final panelist is Colleen. Colleen is with Dow from Washington, D.C., or lives in Washington, D.C., but you'll tell us more about yourself.
Colleen with Dow. I was born and raised in Cincinnati. I've been in D.C. since '95, so I think I am also.
So you're basically a Washingtonian at this point,
I am from DC. And I spend a lot of time working on policy related to plastics and circularity. I've been in the public sector and the private sector both for about 28 years. And also AKA fan of Keefe's, president of Keefe's fan club.
Awesome.
Woo!
So at the end of the panel, we're going to all vote on our favorite panelists. So right now, Keefe is...
That is cruel. 100% team effort here. We're going for partnership, y'all.
Okay, so let's get started here. Let's talk a little bit, maybe we'll just start broadly speaking about resiliency challenges broadly and then sort of dive into the content. So clearly, resiliency is something that is the buzzword that all cities are thinking about as it relates to strategy, both from energy to thinking about where I live in Austin, Texas recently. We've been thinking about resiliency as it relates to extreme heat, where we've had 75 days over 105-degree heat, some crazy number like that. So Keefe, maybe can you talk to us a little bit about, as communities are thinking about resiliency, what are the hardest challenges communities face when it comes to kind of thinking about resiliency and broadly thinking about maybe resiliency relates to waste, perhaps?
Sure. So we are a granting agency, a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work with thousands of communities across the country. And the whole point is that there is a strong interest in recycling as a means for advancing a circular economy, one that doesn't just rely on making stuff and putting it in a landfill, make to waste principles, but one that keeps natural resources in cycle. So we know that the public is interested in this. We know that policymakers are interested in this, but ultimately they look to their communities for solutions. Now, anyone here ever travel from one place to another place and wonder, why can I recycle this at home, but not here? Why does that happen? Well, part of the reason is that there are 9,000 different recycling programs in this country, and they all rely on local decision makers to decide what to recycle, how to market it, how to communicate it. And that's a challenge when it comes to budgets. So when we ask the question of, are communities excited about resiliency? Yes. Do they know that it's critical for navigating climate change? 100%. Do they have the funding to do that right off the bat? No. And that's when nonprofits come in, and that's what I hope we dig into today.
So tell us a little bit, so let's dig into that a little bit more. So we're talking about recycling programs and where to kind of look for solutions. If we were to look maybe across the US, North America, maybe even globally, are there one or two that you would point to say these are kind of beacons that are really good success stories that we could look to for best practices, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of success stories. And when we think about where are the biggest opportunities for growth, I think we should start with understanding that there are 40 million American families that don't even have access to recycling. That means that they can't even do it. So before we talk to them about that, we have to make sure that they can. Now, where are those 40 million Americans? It's not just in one place. It's not just one part of the country. It's in every community there is a gap, often in multifamily housing. So when we look to what makes this system work well, we look to a couple key things. One, can people recycle or engage in the sustainable activity? Recycling is a gateway to other sustainable activities, right? So recycling can be our little test model for other things. So one, can people, meaning frankly, do they have a cart? Two, do they trust it? Do they put the right thing in the bin? Do they engage with it 100%? And three, is there infrastructure to take old stuff and turn it into new stuff? That, when we see those three principles in place, we see success. We just gave a grant to Baltimore, Maryland, which was a multi-year project to be able to invest in this community. And we took years getting there because we didn't want to just invest in the parts of town that were ready. We wanted to make sure that everyone in Baltimore, a community that's known for struggling with financial health, we wanted to make sure that everyone had that same opportunity. So I count Baltimore as a success story of a beginning towards the right solution. I would also point to Austin. You're from Austin.
I am.
My sister's there today. She said it's 97.
Yeah, we've got a cold front in town. It looks like that. So,
And Washington, D.C., also really strong. And, of course, Copenhagen. Great. Providence, Rhode Island is then also, we're just showing up well on stage.
So question, when we think about, so obviously, when we think about resiliency planning, we're also thinking about the impact of disasters, right? And so as we are trying to mitigate the impact of disasters, as we are looking and sort of thinking about the impact of these events, what's the influence that this maybe has on our waste systems as it relates to waste management, and how do we kind of project and prepare for that in the future, so to speak?
So here's the big shift that I'm all in for. So I said I started the recycling partnership almost 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, we were an idea. It was me in the beginning, just me, a cell phone, and a laptop, with the idea that instead of just 9,000 different US recycling programs responding to opportunity, could we instead apply systems thinking for a consistent approach? So those things of what makes a good program, can people, do people, and is there infrastructure? Well, that becomes our gap analysis for any US city, any global city, to be able to have success. So when you put that into play, you start to roll it out. And how does that apply to natural disasters? Well, natural disasters are chaos, right? And they invoke a lot of response. Unless we shift recycling, which is in itself a response, from a reaction to a proactive solution, we'll never be able to anticipate natural challenges and in a way that creates a response that isn't almost equally chaotic. So think about a big storm and what comes out after it, tons and tons of water bottles to help people make sure that they have clean drinking water. That's critical. What if we make sure that that rolls out in tandem with recovery programs to make sure that all of those new essential plastic bottles are also recovered back into the system? This shift from reaction, recycling now, happens when someone can see how to turn a pile of stuff into a new thing. That's what recycling is. The shift to a circular economy, which will allow us to navigate the ever increasing amount of natural disasters, is one that from the very concept of design, either of the material or the activity, knows how those molecules that went into producing something can be kept circular in action.
So Colleen, I want to build off of this topic and move kind of a little bit deeper into this idea of the circular economy. And obviously that you've kind of been in that policy space for a while and are working with cities all over the world to kind of think through how they can activate on the circular economy as particular projects. What are some of the principles as we're kind of thinking about the circular economy that cities should be considering as we're kind of looking about how to kind of scale in that concept within our kind of daily policy arena?
Okay, I'm going to give you a little context from our perspective.
Perfect.
As a material science company of over 125 years, young as we say. We're seeing a big shift towards circularity, which is super exciting. It's also super hard.
Yeah.
Big system change, super hard. I looked at your agenda. You guys are doing a lot of hard things too. This is hard. This is not easy. But what we're seeing is consumers demanding sustainable and circular products. And I'll just use the packaging space as an example. Brand owners are responding to that demand. They've said, over 400 brand owners have set targets to provide circular and sustainable packaging. And so as we move upstream to the material suppliers, we too are responding to that demand. We've set a target just us to produce 3 million metric tons of circular solutions by 2030. This is about 30% of our production. So these are just understanding these are big shifts. We also have the UN negotiating a global agreement on plastic this year and next year. So, we hope that agreement helps accelerate circularity as well. So you'll have every country in the world thinking about circularity. From a material science perspective, in order to meet our goal, we need this used waste back, used materials, which is a manufacturing feedstock for us. We also need to scale mechanical recycling, how we traditionally recycle, where we don't change the chemical structure, but also we need to scale molecular recycling, where we do change the chemical structure. And that's an umbrella term for a whole host of technologies, but when you use these technologies to break the waste back down to the basic molecule. It turns it into a liquid or a gas that can be used as a feedstock, which offsets the fossil-based raw material feedstock. It allows you to recycle more different types of plastic, and it also allows you to create high quality or virgin quality plastic, which could be used for food grade or medical grade, for example. So this is a huge shift. We're also seeing in some cities, one of our partnerships in France, for example, is where we're combining, co-locating mechanical and molecular recycling so that you can recycle as much as possible through the mechanical system, and then everything else can go through the molecular system, which creates higher yields and more efficiencies. The sector has announced about $16 billion in projects so far, and I anticipate in order to meet the demand and to scale, there will be continued and more announcements.
So as we build upon, obviously the sort of the science and innovation in space is transforming and happening really, really quickly. I'm curious to know a little bit more about, as we kind of advance this idea around the circular economy, how should we be thinking about the equity challenges as well, right? I mean, there are some social equity challenges, both as relates to the circular economy, but also even just thinking about recycling in general. And maybe we'll start with you, Colleen, and then Keith, maybe you can jump in on that as well.
Yeah, so again, what's great about systems change is you have an opportunity to do things better. We have to accelerate circularity. We also have to meet our climate goals, and we have to support people in our community. So I'll just give you one rural example and one urban example. Dow is partnering with New Blue Energy on a project where we are buying corn stovers to use to make new materials as a feedstock. The farmers, so corn stovers are the part of corn that you don't eat. It's everything else. We don't want to be competing with food challenges either, so that's a whole nother bucket. And the farmers have to pay to have the corn stovers removed from their fields. But in a new system, the farmers get paid. We use the bio feedstock, and it's better for the climate also. So that's just one rural example. From a city example, I'm thinking about when I was here for Climate Week 2 weeks ago, I got in super late, and I saw a gentleman carrying 2 gigantic bags of aluminum cans. And, you know, am reminded that we have waste pickers and waste entrepreneurs everywhere in developed countries and in developing countries. And so we have to be super mindful about that and using technologies to create transparency and to be equitable within our supply chains as well. So, and lastly, just I think this is very common in your field, but as we're scaling these technologies and putting these new recycling facilities in the communities, you know, we obviously need to be continuing to engage with our communities. I worked at a university, and you have the community plan when you're doing your development. We have our community advisory councils that we work with, but it's super important. Our communities are our biggest stakeholders, and we want to make sure that our communities grow tandem along with the business.
Anything to add to that in terms of the way you're thinking about equity as it relates to the work that you're doing as well?
Yeah, you know, Colleen's talking about feedstocks, and I think it'd be fair to say, what do feedstocks for manufacturing have to do with equity in world cities? And the answer is everything, because when recycling basically generates feedstock for manufacturing, and when that old stuff turns into new stuff, we get the environmental benefit. So as Colleen's talking about it from a business point of view, what makes the economics work better? What I'm hearing is what makes the environmental impact work better. That matters to communities. So I'm thinking about all the mayors that we work with who want to provide this as a service to their citizens, but need the economics to work. What helps the economics to work so that we can serve every part of the population? It's when companies can see the benefit from that advancement of a circular economy. They are for-profit entities. There is a for-profit entity to climate solutions, including recycling. So how does that pay down into a community? So we take census data to analyze. We have a national database of all those 9,000 different recycling programs. Then we take census data so that we can cut it apart and really understand, do BIPOC communities have different levels of access than traditionally white ones? If so, why? Is it the type of housing that they have, the type of services that they have? Our goal is to not make it so that everyone thinks about recycling all the time. We want it to be so easy that they can do it without recycling. I think we see that more in a European model. So what does it take to fix recycling in this country? $17 billion would make sure everyone can, everyone does, and infrastructure. That trifecta that I love talking about. That's the CapEx to build it. The OpEx then would run it. There's a $30 billion return on that $17 billion investment. We could do it in 5 years. I'll start talking about something new. That's an investment I think we can't afford not to make.
I love it. I love that. So Signe, obviously you're kind of in the urban design space, and sort of one of the things is we're thinking about this idea of being in sort of the net zero space is obviously our urban design is coming more and more to the forefront, and particularly with the idea that as we think about production of new built environment, the construction of new built environment, there's a lot of expectations about how we do that and how we pay for that, right, in terms of who bears that kind of responsibility. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about the work that you're doing in this space and how you are advising your clients to think about incorporating these sort of net zero practices into the work that you all are doing in the practice.
What we're doing in architecture is sort of prototyping the things that we can scale up when we do cities. So we have been focusing on decarbonization of the buildings we have been doing the last 10 years. And in Europe, we have EU taxonomy, so that means that we will go for almost net zero over a period of time. I think it's around 10 years. So right now, you cannot get a building permit in Denmark if you have more than 12 kilo of carbon per square meter per year in a 50-year lifespan, right? So there is an issue on actually doing, you cannot do what you want or everything you want to do.
So those are policies that have been policy.
So, and for every year from now on, that will be, very, very tight and more tight. So we practice through the design we do, and we have done small buildings, prototyping small schools on 3 and 6 kilo per square meter per year and so on, to see what kind of knowledge do we need to gain, both on technology, on new materials, new production, craft, everything related to bringing sort of old materials into a new era. And we see a huge potential now in scaling. So I think right now, based on these small prototyping projects, we have right now on our tables 1 million square meter on timber in different biogenics projects right now. So there is a huge potential of scaling. And we have, I myself are deeply involved in a new city we're doing in timber, totally timber. So there's a need for the bigger investors to develop new business cases, taking this carbon metrics into the design, into their ESG measurements and so on. So it's so you can say we go from something very nerdy, small, 0.02 something, and then we scale it into plus minus 10% on an urban level.
You had mentioned, obviously, looking at some metrics of carbon per meter, for instance. What other performance metrics should we be thinking about in the design space as we're kind of thinking about how we do this type of work in terms of developing cities that are very sort of life-centric design, for instance? Like, what are those other metrics that policymakers should be considering?
Biodiversity, I have to say, that's the other big crisis, that we have to be so much aware of. And the cities, the cities has a huge potential actually using those investments coming in, working with a biodiversity strategy also. I know that, Manhattan's super crowded, so I cannot imagine that we will have all species represented, but we need to think about other types of cities and urban developments where there will be a more equal balance in this sort of the habitats we are creating. And I think the city I just mentioned, this wooden city for 6,000 new inhabitants in Copenhagen, it was on a green field, you can say. So there was nature, there was some kind of open space, open land, and we got huge protests from community on don't take away our nature. You have to build in another place. And we see that everywhere we do urban development, it creates a lot of emotions. And one of the biggest conflicts is this nature versus city. Mm-hmm. And I think it's our obligation as designers or practitioners actually to create design solutions where we can have both. And this city, it's 18 hectares, the land. We built 11. So we have 7 left for nature. And the landscape design we have done increases the biodiversity by 300%. So design matters, and I think that's my key message here today is also to say we need to fix the systems or reshape the systems, but we also need to create desirable life for all around us, and we can definitely do that by design.
So what's the implications of redesign and retrofitting, right? So for instance, a city like New York is not going to be doing greenfield development, right? It's not going to happen. We are space constrained and land constrained, and a lot of our urban development is old. What about the principles of taking a lot of the things that you're describing, and how do you think about that in retrofit? And I guess the question for me is how do you do it? How do you switch it from a policy standpoint, right? Because you've got the policy landscape we're trying to, but also how do you finance it? Yeah. Like how do you make it pencil out? Because in the U.S., for instance, in our markets, making sure that it all pencils out and that it can frankly turn a profit is essentially important to this. How do you achieve all of that in a retrofit, for instance?
I think especially you need various scenarios to go for net zero in different urban settings. And I think here retrofit and repurposing and transformation, conversion of from office to housing, that's definitely the way to go. But in order to do that, we need to notch for different partnerships. And I think there's so much capital right now, and I have also participated in a lot of stuff during the Climate Week on radical partnerships on the capital side, unlisted real estate money actually going into sort of the flow. And I think for me, you need to be able to liberate the square meters we have already built. Mm-hmm. So the usage of square meters, that is, the systems you're talking about is a little different, but for me, we have so many square meters that are not being used efficiently.
Well, I think it does connect to recycling because people love to ask me, what's the greenest thing to buy, right? Like which material, which bottle should I choose? The best thing to buy is nothing. That is the very best thing to buy. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, I sat up in the audience earlier today to hear the themes of action and finance. And during it, I don't know if anyone else saw, there was a bird in the little garden out here. And I couldn't help but wonder, how did the bird find that garden right here in the middle of Manhattan and make it in there? And, I think that was like a fighting chance to find that. What you're trying to create is a city that's balanced.
Yeah.
So Colleen, you are thinking about infrastructure in this space a lot, right? In terms of thinking about how to support kind of innovation and partnership to advance a lot of the things that you're interested in the circular economy. Same kind of question for you is that a lot of cities are having to kind of retrofit these policies, right? This is not, we're not designing from the ground up. We're not thinking about brand new recycling programs or brand new even circular economy programs from the beginning. A lot of places we're going in and saying, look, let's take old public policy and old partnerships and think about how to kind of change it a bit to make it achieve the same goals. I'd be curious to know, from your perspective, how do we do that in the policy front? What are some things that cities and communities can be thinking about as a way to advance this work forward in terms of maybe retrofitting old policies, but also maybe thinking about even new partnerships perhaps that are necessary?
Yeah, from a policy perspective, I think our regulations are really set up for the linear economy of just, you just take the resources, you make something, you use it, and you throw it away.
Yep.
The regulations are not well suited for a circular economy where we're using that waste as a feedstock to create new products. And I think that's a problem across the governments, across the world. I think one of the ways I see your audience being able to partner and really help as we work to accelerate circularity is on the end market side. There's a lot of R&D and new materials to help you meet those climate goals. I'm thinking of one company in particular, again, mindful that this is a global conference, the Center for Regenerative Design Collaboration. They take plastic waste, including marine debris for some of your island cities, and turn it into an eco-aggregate for concrete. So improving the performance, but also providing an important end market that demand, increasing the demand that we need for these recycled products. And then I think another way to partner is you're really, as you're designing buildings and cities, you're designing our habits of the future.
Yeah.
And so to Keefe's point about not buying, reducing, reminding and designing with the waste hierarchy in mind, and ensuring that there's reuse and refill models. I mean, the easiest is the water, being able to refill your water bottle, of course, but also building out in that precious square footage space for recycling collections. I've seen legislation where to use public funding to build a school, you have to include building out recycling. Multi-unit housing needs space for recycling. Hospitals, all of those designs are creating future habits for us to get that material and to keep it in circularity and keep it in use so that we're limiting, we're mindful of our finite resources.
Are there any cities that you'd point to, maybe here in the U.S. or just globally, that they're getting this right, where they're kind of connecting the dots between circular economy, obviously recycling is tied to that, as well as urban design? Who would we point to as, say, these are our best practices? Maybe I'd love to hear a thought from each of you of, say, this is an example that I would point to. Man, we want to get to solutions for this group. Is there a best practice out there you'd say this is the place, and I put my finger on it, and I would say this is the one I'd point to as kind of a golden star?
Well, every community likes to think of themselves as different and unique. And so when we look to problem solving, system change needs to find common solutions, access, education, infrastructure, can people, do people, infrastructure, right? But then finding that nuance to local. So when I see trends of what's working, I get very excited about the extended producer responsibility movement that we're seeing in the US. It's modeled off of many other countries.
Tell them more about what that is.
Sure will. I'll dig in. It's modeled after the European model of producers. If you make stuff and sell it, then you need to pay in per unit, usually per unit, you need to pay into a kitty to make sure that old stuff turns into new stuff. So right now, Maine, Colorado, California, and Oregon have passed extended producer responsibility laws that they're all a little bit different, but they get to the heart of we can't just progress that linear economy of you take resources, you make them, and you throw them away. We need to be more intentional of which materials have a right to be put into the common space, the public space, to be used. It's not up to just each of us to do our part. We have to have a fighting chance that there is a system where stuff is designed for it, that companies are responsible for what they've produced, and that it's not just on the backs of communities to make it happen. Right now, communities pay more to send something to a recycling facility than they do to send something to a landfill. That's why it doesn't happen more. They're just strapped, y'all. You know, it's not for want of technology or will or interest. The system just is prioritizes disposal. And so when I look at the extended producer responsibility laws, these are things that I started our organization in the void of that in this country. And when we started, it was like, it was kind of scary words to use. EPR legislation were scary. What if we turn into Europe? Oh, and now we're starting to see it. And so as a nonprofit that was started in a void.
Texas, we get scared if we're turning to California, so I understand.
I think Texas would be a great spot for EPR. I've got my eye on you, by the way. But how do you get there? You work with companies to say Dow and all beverage companies and product companies. This works in your best interest because you've made a pledge to make sure that this system works. And so we are working with communities, with companies, with NGOs to do this all together in a common place. So you asked about cities. I think those are statewide initiatives. I'd love to see that on a federal one. It seems a little tricky right now, politics perhaps, but still I'll keep working on it.
Yep. Good examples that you point to?
I think Singapore is on the right track. Singapore is a very, very small country, one island. And what they're doing now is that they are working with systems. They have a water issue, they have a food issue, they have a nature issue. And all these systems are some of that invisible knowledge that needs to be brought to life in all the design they do on the surface. So right now, we are doing a master plan together with the government, creating the 30% of all the food needs to be produced within that very small region. And I think some of these projects, that's very far from classical architecture, doing operas and all that stuff. But for me, that is also a promise from our side to participate in solving real problems with design, actually stacking these food productions in a very beautiful landscape and so on, instead of just doing agriculture all over. So Singapore is on the forefront. I think what I saw in Arkansas, I have to say.
Tell us more about Arkansas.
I think that was, they didn't even know that they were talking about decarbonization. It was rooted in the forestry.
You're in Northwest Arkansas.
You have to do a lecture at a university, and the link to the timber, it's just so powerful and strong. They talk about labor, they talk about skills, craft, design, and it's one line of sight, and I think that's very, very beautiful. And when I talk to them about, oh, you're decarbonized, okay. I don't know, but we do a lot of timber buildings. I think that kind of mentality is just...
Well, I think they've actually mandated only mass timber buildings on their campus going forward, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, for me, very circular. And it's very local. And there's no one size fits all. That's why we need to find different strategies towards urban development.
Any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, chime in on the EPR, huge supporters of EPR from systems change, not just from financing, but you can incentivize through eco-modulation.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's a huge way that's a different way of thinking about public policy, right? We always think about public policy in terms of regulation, but incentivization is a key piece of this.
So if you have a fee on packaging, but the fee is different if it can be recycled or is recycled, or by weight, or a whole bunch of different attributes, then you are starting at the beginning, where we all have to start at the design, for us, design for recyclability. But we have, there's a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers involved in creating a package. And so you really have to incentivize the entire system. We can't just control our customers, we have to incentivize the system. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to Anchorage, because I just think there's a lot of learnings there for us in the US when we think about other parts of the world and island countries, because they have a lot of challenges being separate from the lower 48. Huge costs to move building materials up, and back, and so limited landfills. So they just are really, I think, kind of a model on the reuse, reduce, and that part of the waste hierarchy. Don't fill the landfill versus don't feed the landfill. Lots of campaigns. I had an interesting experience there and learned a lot, and so. Cool. They have a really exciting team working on their challenges.
I'm thinking about the last time I was in this room was a little over a year ago for Climate Week, and the president of Bermuda was sitting perhaps right here, the World Bank. There was a great, New York Times was hosting this discussion.
Not as good as moderator as me, though.
No. No. And so this conversation, and the president of Bermuda was saying, the problem with trying to solve system change is that we are currently financing a historical approach to problem solving. And he was complaining about the fact that the only money that he could get as a small island country who did not cause climate change but will be swamped by it, the only money he could get, and he pointed to the World Bank beside him, was loans. And he's like, who the heck wants to give Bermuda a loan because we're going underwater? This does not make sense. And so I think when we talk about innovative policy, there is a regulatory landscape, but we need to approach a problem-solving landscape, because the social change investment sectors that we're speaking earlier today, that's fascinating to me, but there's no return on engaging the public in trust, right? Like that is not a financially returnable investment in that way. So we have to think about, it's critical to success, but it's not like a return on something that's sellable. And so this system change approach takes conferences like these and people like you to say, I'm tired of this, I want something new, and policy has to be the driver behind that.
Yeah, so our last question, because we're running short on time, a lot of our discussion has been about some best practices and some solutions, but as we talk about the idea of thinking about the impact of climate and how we're adapting to those changes, is that we're not moving fast enough, that we are thinking about this in a way that is perhaps a bit too slow. And so I guess my question is to kind of end on an optimistic note. If there are some challenges that we are facing with this, what are the things that give you hope for how we are moving towards trying to solve these issues as we look to the future? Are there anything you would, golden stars that maybe you'd point to say, these are things that we're doing really good and we should be really proud of the work that we have, that we're doing here, perhaps?
I can start. I can do it short, because I think I have also been, I'm more depressed this year than last year on the Climate Week, because it is 1.05 degrees Celsius is not, we will go beyond that for many degrees, I guess. So exactly what you're talking about here on the community engagement level, I think that is where the magic is happening. And I think you have a tradition in US actually working with community engagement in a completely different way than, well, we are not doing it, I must say, in Europe in the same way. It's more like top-down, everything. But I think, you know, putting those voices into play and make that social friction and movement from beneath, I think that is something that could change things rapidly.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
I get optimistic about the middle because I see this groundswell of public interest and organized change from the community level, and I see companies agreeing that we need policy to make better solutions, policy that's going to hold them accountable. So I see the public, I see the private sector, I see it coming together, and it's that closure toward that intersection that makes me most optimistic.
Mm-hmm. And Colleen, you get our last remark.
I think there's a lot of energy towards climate change, but more and more people and organizations are understanding that circularity is part of that. Mm-hmm. We're not there yet, but every day more and more people understand that. I think the consumers are going to continue to drive circularity. That trajectory is not changing, and so all of us are going to continue to meet that demand. So it's not just that we're doing it for climate, but the business case is, we have to do it, which is great, and we want to do it anyways. But and the last thing is, I'm going to choose to be optimistic about the global agreement on plastic. A lot can be done. I don't think they'll miss the opportunity to accelerate circularity. I hope they don't. I'm going to be hopeful that they don't, because it's a huge opportunity.
Yep. Y'all, thank me joining our panel, please. Thank y'all. There we go.